Zara, will you join me? You can stand like about a foot back and centered. Perfect. And then take one more step forward. Right there. Great. So I love this look, and it's going to be perfect for this concept. So what I would like to do now is I need to build this shoot step by step by step, because I really want you to see what every modifier, every attachment, every change in my camera settings really does. So to start with, I'm actually going to take the grid off of the main light so you can see why I'm adding it. And we'll start just by building this main light here. Perfect. And Mikkel, I have an assistant today, and Mikkel, he's going to be helping me out. Thank you. And let's start with talking about this beauty dish. All right, so the idea of this shoot, part of the frame will be still, part of the frame is going to be lit by a constant light and will be moving. So what I need to do first is set what will be still and moving. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a beauty dish, and I'm going to get the right exposure and freeze her in place. So let me just start off with getting that main light set. I do in fact need to adjust the height of my light because my model is much taller than what I was testing on. So, all right, let's do this. Perfect. And I'll have you still take one more step forward. I think right there should be good. And let me take a look here. All right. Now, one of the things that I always do in my sets is I use a modeling light so that I can actually see how the light's falling on my subject. So it's not on, so I need to turn it on real quick so I can actually see where the light is illuminating. That's beautiful. Okay. I'm going to start by shooting 1/200th of a second, which will get rid of ambient light. I'm going to shoot at f11 and ISO 200. That's usually where I start most of my studio shots. I am going to be shooting her full length because I need to get the movement of the dress. So let me take my very first shot just with that beauty dish. Right there. All right, perfect. Now, one of the things that I'm noticing as I look at this is without having my beauty dish with a grid, I see that the light spills from head to toe. So if you look at this, you can see that there's light on the floor, there's light on her feet. The reason this is a problem is that wherever anything is hit by the strobe, it's going to be frozen in place. But I said I wanted part of the dress to move. The bottom part, in fact. So what I need to do is I need to restrict the area that my beauty dish is illuminating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a grid. By adding the grid, Mikkel, will you add that grid for me? What it's going to do is going to focus the light in. So really, it will be mostly illuminating maybe her torso and her face. And that leaves me free to use constant light on the rest of the dress. If the beauty dish needs to be a little bit more focused, let's say that it's spreading too far, I can always move it in. By moving the beauty dish in, it focuses the light even more. It doesn't have enough time or enough distance to spread out. So let me test this for a second. I also know I may need to adjust my exposure because adding a grid will cut down a little bit of that light. Let's take another shot. Okay, so when you look at this image, what you see is by the time you get to her hands that are at her side, it's completely fallen to shadow. That's exactly what I need for this blur. That looks good. And then you'll see one other result of adding a grid. The background went from gray, that's a dark gray, but to completely black. By adding a grid, the light falls off faster. So in this case, I don't necessarily need to use a black background if I'm trying to go for a dark background. So the grid does a lot right there. So that is light number one, freezing things in place. But let's move on to our second light. This light is going to be our constant light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on. But when I turn this light on, by default, it's set so that it will strobe. So I need to do something so that it won't fire. I only want the modeling light. So a couple things I could do. First thing I could do is I could change the channel. So when I'm using right now, I'm shooting on channel 2. I could change this to another one so it won't fire. Or on these particular mono lights, I can actually turn off the syncing ability. So I turn sync off, then it won't fire. So that's what I'm going to do for these. Great. Now, of course, I need the modeling light, so let's flip that on as well. And I have it set to full power. Because of the light that I'm using, I can also turn that power up or down. So let me take a quick test, a quick look at exactly what this looks like when I've turned the modeling light on. Okay, same thing, great. there's no change. But there's not supposed to be a change. Here's why. If you've ever shot with studio strobe on location, you know that your shutter speed controls the ambient light, the light in the room, the light in the environment. Right now, I'm shooting at my camera's sync speed. So at 1/200th of a second in f11, this is not registering. It's not showing up. It's too dim because it's a constant light. It's catching the strobe because it's firing. So what I need to do is I need to figure out how I can get this to register. And the control that I'll be using for this shoot is going to be my shutter speed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my shutter speed and lower it down and slower and slower and slower. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually lower it much more than you would think you'd ever want to shoot. I'm going to lower it to start from 1/200th of a second down to 1/6 of a second, like 1/6. And you think, okay, well, if I do that, won't my picture be blurry? The answer is no, and no with a caveat, and I'll show you how to control that. The reason the answer is no is this up here, this strobe is going to freeze her in place, so there won't be any movement. The movement will be from where this modeling light is illuminating. So let me just show you now when I take that picture what the scene looks like. When I take a look at this, what you're seeing is you do see the dress illuminated, but wait, all of a sudden you see the complete background and you see all of the light around because that long shutter speed, it's making all of the ambient and constant light in the room show up, not just the modeling light. So the overhead lights are showing up, it'll light the background, everything. So what this means for you is when you're doing this technique, you need to eliminate all other constant ambient light other than what you're using to light the dress. So that means turn off your overhead lights, pull the curtains over the windows, do whatever you can to completely black out your space. I've done this before where I even had kind of a big bank of monitors near the subject, and even the light from those monitors from the computer was actually showing up. So when I say eliminate the light, you really got to get rid of it or it's going to show up. So I'm going to need to do that in this scene, is to dim everything in order to actually get the effect to work. Now that I have the overhead lights off, let's take a look at the difference in this shot. It's a drastic difference. Now there's none of that overhead ambient, and you really can see what the modeling light is doing. That modeling light is now illuminating the bottom half of her dress. And if you look at it, you'll actually see that it's really yellow, really orange. I mean, even though her dress is kind of a golden bronze tone, where the modeling light is hitting is even more so. And the reason is because that modeling light is a tungsten modeling light. I'm shooting on a white balance of flash because I am going to be lighting her face with a strobe. But that tungsten light now is going to look really, really warm and yellow, which works great for this shot. If it didn't, if you were doing something with a different idea, you could, of course, gel your modeling light. All right, but then the other thing I'm seeing as I look here, if I look in the shadow side of her face, if I'm looking at the side of her face and her arms, I see a lot of this yellow. And I don't want it to be there, because really what I'd like to do is I just want strobe on the top part of her body and then constant light on the bottom part. Well, right now the modeling light is spilling everywhere, which is why I have the barn doors, because the barn doors give me that control that I need. So what I can do is, if you watch her face, what I'm going to do is I'm going to restrict the light by closing the top barn door. So now the modeling light, the constant light I have here, is spilling on her face. The light that you're actually seeing currently on her face is from the beauty dish, and we're going to deal with that later. So I can really restrict the light so there's no spill of my constant light. And if I'm looking at the floor, that's going to be pretty bright, and I probably don't want it to be, so I can close the bottom of the barn door. It's the barn doors that give me a lot of control. So now most of my light is just going to be concentrated on the lower part of her dress, which is exactly what I want. So let me just take another photo to see what I'm working with. All right, so I've gotten rid of a lot of that yellow on the side of her face. Now we need the creative part. We need something a little bit more interesting. And this is why I picked this dress. I love the shimmer, I love the train. And so what we're going to do is, Mikhail, can you be my dress floofer? he's gonna throw the dress in the air. We're going to be able to catch the light shimmering on it, and that's going to give us some of the movement. Because I've got a long exposure, the constant light is showing up over that long exposure, which means the dress lit by the constant light is going to blur. And it's going to give me that interest, that energy. All right, so just like this. All right, ready? 1, 2, and 3. Perfect. And I'm just gonna have you do this, up and down. So we're just trying to get movement. Great. All right, here we go. Ready? And go ahead. Keep going. When you look at this, you can see that the light, the way that it's hitting the dress in the long exposure, it's almost painterly. Like it looks like strokes of a paintbrush. Good, but there's more that I can do. Because it's a long exposure, the next thing that I might try to get even more movement would be to move my lens. There's a very specific reason why you want to shoot this concept with a zoom lens. Because during that long exposure, if I click and then I zoom, what's going to happen is that light hitting the dress is going to become larger, it's going to become more dramatic. There's not really a right or wrong answer. It's just going to look more interesting. So what I sometimes do is I sometimes click and zoom. I sometimes click and zoom and move my camera in an unusual way. I sometimes click and zoom and move my camera and move. I mean, each one is going to do something different, and it depends on the dress and it depends on the texture. All right, so I'm going to try a couple shots. Again, I'm going to just vary what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll zoom, sometimes I'll move my camera. We'll see. I'll see what I like best with this particular shot. So I'm going to have you just kind of bounce it up and down for a while. Eventually, I'll have you probably drop it. We'll see what I like. Okay. All right, ready? Good. All right. Basically what I see is when I actually move my camera a bit more, it takes the streaks of light and it exaggerates them. It moves it even further when I'm actually zooming in with my camera. If I just shoot when he's moving the dress, I just see the streaks of light on the dress. There's no right or wrong answer, and I'll probably shoot a little bit of everything. So I think I'm just about ready to shoot. So let's put on kind of our finishing touches to make this work. As I look at this, one of the problems that I am identifying is you'll actually see ghosting of her face. You see a little bit of her face in the shot. Not the part that's supposed to be frozen. There's like kind of an orange ghost to the side. I've actually changed the spill of light, so it shouldn't be from this. And what it actually is from is it's from the modeling light that's on the beauty dish. The strobe fires, and then during the long exposure, the modeling light's still on, which ends up registering on her face. So I'm going to go turn off that modeling light. This is when I would turn off any extra ambient light in the room and then start shooting. So let me turn off that modeling light. Great. I also see some bounce on the floor, so I'm just going to try to eliminate that. Let's test some more. Great. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. See how that looks. Perfect. So I took that one shot and it's already right. You'll notice the ghosting is now gone. There's not as much orange from her arms or from her face because we've turned off the modeling light. So I'm all ready to shoot now. So this is going to be when I start posing her, directing her, experimenting with the zoom, experimenting with the flowing of the dress. And I'm going to shoot a ton, and so then later on I can pick out kind of just the right shot. Turn towards me. Yeah, good. And put your left hand on your left shoulder, like this, like kind of like dramatic. Perfect. And then lean your chest towards me. Great. And then arm back just a little. Perfect. So that hand will kind of be just around here, around here. So let me see how that looks. Great. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, floof. Oh, pretty. Okay, good. Even though it feels real posy, can you put your hand on your waist for a second? Good. And kind of arch that shoulder forward a little. Yeah. And then pop your elbow back just a little bit more. And with your thumb, can you wrap it around your body? Yeah. Good. 1, 2, and 3. We've turned off all the ambient light and my modeling light on the face. So one of the questions might be, how do you focus? Well, in this case, I've got the constant light on the dress, and I'm shooting at f11. So even if I focus on the illumination on the dress and recompose or have my focus point there, her face at f11 is still going to be in focus. So I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to be focusing on the face, but instead maybe somewhere around the highlights in her midsection. So with that, we're going to do a lot of dress movement. I'll vary some poses, and I'm going to switch up my frame. I'll do some that are a little closer, some that are wider and more dramatic. even if I see the edge of the background, I know I'm gonna go solid black, so I can always just kind of fill it in. So it's convenient to be able to do that when I'm shooting with a pure black background. If you do this, you want to make sure as well that you don't have your trigger set on rear curtain sync. It has to be on first curtain, because if it's on rear curtain, you'll click and then zoom or move, and then if it fires at the end of the frame, you have no idea what your frame is, so you need to have it in the front. So I made sure that on my remote I have it set to first curtain. All right, a few more. I'm gonna move my camera this time. Ready, 1, 2, and 3. All right, yeah, that's definitely that fiery, dramatic, creative technique that I was going for. Now, what this shot is really all about is it's really learning to control your light. So you need to control it in many different ways, and that might be the control you have over mixing constant light and studio strobe, or it might be controlling the spill of the light using grids or using barn doors. But when you understand how each of these things, these different elements work and work together, you can get creative shots like we've captured here. So I can't wait to see what these look like later on in post. But for now, we're gonna move on to our next scenario. And we're gonna totally change the look. We're going a completely different direction, but I'm going to show you another really fun, really creative in-camera lighting technique that uses completely different controls than this. And it's another creative tool to add to your arsenal.